Shiki is a troubled, ugly teenager who is one bad day away from mag dumping his entire class. Unsurprisingly, he was expelled from his school for his bad behavior, mostly because he kept threatening to use his classmates as targeting practice. He tries to act like he doesn't care about the fact that he got expelled, but honestly, with the way his life is going right now, he knows he's probably going to be stuck flipping burgers at Mickey D's for the rest of his life. A few moments later, Shiki's dad comes charging into the room and smacks Shiki on the head because he just received the letter informing him of Shiki's expulsion. He can't believe Shiki went and got himself expelled from school like that, and he's so mad that he tries to smack Shiki again, but Shiki already adapted to the attack pattern, so he dodges and jumps back onto his bed. His dad calms himself down after that, but he still wants an explanation from Shiki because he wants to know why he was expelled. He also wants to know how Shiki managed to get all the guns he keeps in his room because having this stuff isn't cheap or legal for that matter. He tells Shiki he needs to stop acting like this before he ruins his life, but hearing that strikes a nerve with Shiki. So he yells at his dad and says he's glad they aren't related by blood because he'd never want to end up like him. That last part really hurts Shiki's dad's feelings, and Shiki knows he took it too far, but before either of them can say another word, the phone rings down in the liquor store Shiki's dad owns, so he heads down to answer it. When he answers the phone, he is surprised to find out that it's a large beer delivery order, but he doesn't get many customers, so he is happy to comply. He heads out in his car to make the delivery, and once Shiki sees him leave, he decides to try some target practice and starts muttering to himself about how he wishes things hadn't turned out this way. All of a sudden, he hears a loud crash sound outside his room, and a moment later, he gets dragged out onto the street by a rope of black mist. Shiki is incredibly disoriented by the fall, and by the time he realizes what's going on, a man named Samadair slowly walks out of the smoke, and he seems to know who Shiki is. Just then, a car comes out of nowhere to ram Samadair into a wall, and once he stops moving, Shiki's father yells for Shiki to get in immediately. Shiki doesn't question it and immediately jumps into his dad's car, but once they are presumably safe, he starts asking a lot of questions. First of all, he wants to know why some crazy man just dragged him out onto the street and why his dad was so calm about killing him with a car back there. Shiki's dad tells him that there's no way someone like Samadair would die from getting run over by a car. Shiki still has no idea what's going on, so his dad decides that it's time to tell him the truth. He informs Shiki that he is a descendant of the Oni, and Samadair is a descendant of Momotaro, which is why he is so hell-bent on hunting Shiki down. Shiki is so stunned that he doesn't know what to say, and there's a lot more to the story, but his dad doesn't have time to explain all the details because it looks like Sami has caught up to them. Black mist begins to surround the car, and it begins to break down, so Shiki's dad is forced to drive into a nearby abandoned factory so they can get out. After getting out, Shiki turns back and sees the car covered in that strange black mist from before, but before he can ask what that stuff is, the car goes up in a massive ball of flames. In all the chaos, Shiki's dad takes his eyes off Shiki for a second, and in that short time frame, Shiki's butt was kidnapped by the Samadair. Inside the warehouse, Samadair uses his black mist to restrain Shiki in the air. When he is asked why he is doing this, all he has to say is that all who possess Oni blood are nothing more than pests to be exterminated. Samadair is about to execute Shiki once and for all, but before that could happen, Shiki's dad shows up to stop him. As he walks in, he explains that all the legends of Momotaro and the Oni are true, and the battle has been raging on for millennia now. Across the generations, the descendants of Momotaro have all taken up the duty of eliminating the Oni, which is how the Momotaro Agency was formed. Shiki is still confused about all this, but his dad never expected a failure like him to understand immediately anyway. For now, he tells Shiki to just stay put and let him handle Samadair, but as soon as Samadair hears that Shiki's dad intends to challenge him, he creates two swords out of the black mist and charges in with astounding speed. However, Shiki's dad pulls out a mist blade of his own and blocks the attack. The black mist is a unique trait possessed only by the descendants of Momotaro, and here's where the dad lore deepens. Shiki's father was actually a former member of the Momotaro Agency who once worked alongside Samadair. His name used to be Tsuyoshi Momotogawa, however, he left that life behind a long time ago so he could raise Shiki away from the agency's eyes, but unfortunately he couldn't keep Shiki hidden forever. Samadair asks Tsuyoshi if he has forgotten just how dangerous Oni truly are, but Tsuyoshi doesn't want to talk about it. All he wants to do is protect Shiki. Tsuyoshi puts up a good fight against Samadair, but Sami eventually catches him lacking, and in an instant, Tsuyoshi's chest is cut open. He falls to the ground unconscious, and Shiki is horrified by what he just witnessed. He starts yelling at Sami for hurting his dad, so Sami turns to him and prepares to finish Shiki off. But with the last bit of strength he has, Tsuyoshi grabs his leg to stop him from getting to Shiki. Sami asks why Tsuyoshi would go so far to protect an Oni kid, but he says his father doesn't need a reason to protect his son. Shiki may not be the best student or person for that matter, and he may have Oni blood in him. But he has never hurt anyone before, so Tsuyoshi asks how Sami could possibly bring himself to kill an innocent child like this. Tsuyoshi's words sting because he has been having regrets about everything he has done lately, but he doesn't want to listen to this anymore, so he summons his sword and prepares to finish Tsuyoshi off. Shiki is helpless as he watches his father about to die at the hands of Sami, and the only thought going through his head right now is how much he wants to kill Tsuyoshi. Blood begins to drip from every orifice in his body as his mind is overcome with sheer hatred, and by the time Samudera turns his attention back to Shiki, he's no longer there. The next thing Sami knows, he hears the sound of several guns getting cocked next to his head, and he is so startled that he instinctively jumps back, narrowly avoiding the attack, but he still has no idea where Shiki is. Just then, he sees a drop of blood land on the floor, so he looks up and finds an awakened Shiki hanging off the ceiling. Sami can't believe Shiki was able to awaken his Oni abilities and control his blood in such a short time, but what truly makes Oni terrifying is the fact that they lack a sense of humanity, so they are unbelievably brutal. Sami readies his sword in preparation for Shiki's next attack, but once Shiki starts firing blood missiles at him, Sami realizes this is too much for him to handle and starts running away. He eventually manages to escape the blast radius, but that doesn't mean the battle is over because Shiki emerges from the smoke and kicks Sami so hard that he is knocked into a pile of rubble and is barely conscious now. Shiki then stands over him and unleashes every weapon he has stored in his arsenal at once. The warehouse is destroyed in the mayhem, but surprisingly, Sami managed to survive the attack, and even more surprising is the fact that Shiki suddenly transforms back into a human. Shiki is confused and wonders why his entire body is covered in blood, which is a normal response given the situation, and Sami plans to take advantage of the confusion to finish Shiki off before he transforms again. He begins charging towards Shiki, while repeating that all Oni must be eliminated with no exceptions. Shiki isn't able to control his transformation at will yet, so he is pretty much a sitting duck right now. However, as his blade is about to strike, Tsuyoshi jumps out in front of him and takes the hit instead. Sami can't believe that Tsuyoshi would go as far as to sacrifice his life for an Oni, but Tsuyoshi recalls the good old days he spent with Shiki, and he honestly doesn't mind dying here since he got to live a fulfilling life. Samudera has grown tired of this fight, and all the destruction they cause is starting to draw the attention of the crowd, so since the Momotaro agency must remain secret, Samudera withdraws for now and fades away into a mass of black mist. Once Samudera is gone, Tsuyoshi collapses into Shiki's arms and Shiki is really worried about him, so he says he's going to call an ambulance, but Tsuyoshi tells him that no hospital can save him at this point. It's only a matter of time before he dies, so he would like to talk to Shiki one last time. First of all, he apologizes for keeping the truth from him all this time, but it's not exactly an easy topic to bring up in conversation. Unfortunately, he won't be here much longer, so he can't offer much in the way of support, but he tells Shiki to make sure he gets stronger in the future so he can beat both the Momotaro group and Oni so he can live a truly free life. Shiki yells at his dad for talking as if he has already died because he doesn't plan on letting that happen. He begins carrying Tsuyoshi to the hospital, and seeing Shiki show so much concern for him puts a smile on Tsuyoshi's face. But his wounds are way too severe, so after taking a few steps, Tsuyoshi loses all strength in his body and collapses to the floor. Shiki desperately begs his father to get up because he still hasn't gotten a chance to apologize and make up for all the hurtful things he said about him this morning, but it's already too late because Tsuyoshi is gone. Shiki sits there for a moment and cries over his dad's corpse, but all of a sudden, someone rolls up behind him and says he can't stay here because there will be too many witnesses. Shiki is startled, so he prepares for another fight, but before he could even turn around, he gets chopped in the neck and is knocked out instantly. It takes a lot of skill to be able to sneak up on someone with roller skates on, so Shiki clearly never stood a chance against him to begin with. Meanwhile, the leaders of the Momotaro agency are all in an uproar because they just found out about Samudera's failed attempt to eliminate Shiki, and they are starting to wonder if he has gotten weaker. But given the situation, they can't blame him for withdrawing since they can't let the public find out about their existence. However, they also don't want the public to become aware of the existence of Oni, so they plan to kill Shiki as soon as they can get their hands on him. However, that's going to be nearly impossible now because after getting knocked out, he was taken to a remote island in the middle of nowhere, and the idea is to enroll Shiki in a school full of half-Onis just like him so he can train his abilities properly. But before that, NATO is going to need to do a thorough evaluation to find out whether Shiki is going to be useful or not, and I can already tell that it's not going to be a fun experience. Shiki wakes up and finds himself shirtless and tied to a chair while the man behind him is doing push-ups on his umbrella. That's a sentence I never thought I'd have to say, but somehow, this is nowhere near the strangest thing Shiki has seen so far. The man's name is Nato, and now that Shiki is awake, he says he will begin explaining what's going on. First, he reveals his horns to show Shiki that he is an Oni just like him, and after that, he tells Shiki that he was brought here for two reasons: evaluation and retrieval. As Shiki already knows, the Momotaro agency hunts down Onis like them using the Black Mist, and the man who killed Shiki's dad was one of them. Their goal is to ultimately exterminate all Oni in the world, so to oppose them, the Oni agency was formed, and Mato's job is to find recently awakened Oni like Shiki, and figure out whether he is fit to join the Oni agency. That's pretty much it, so Naito takes his board back and unties Shiki's mouth so he can ask questions. However, as soon as Shiki can speak again, he immediately starts yelling at Naito and demands to know what they've done with his father. Naito is annoyed by all of Shiki's yelling, so he deducts a few points from the evaluation and tells Shiki that his father's body was safely stored within this facility, but the guy is dead right now anyway, so it's not important. Shiki begins squirming around and trying to get himself free, but that violent behavior kind of the whole reason that Naito tied him up in the first place, so he won't be releasing him yet. Shiki is incredibly mad, but he knows yelling isn't going to get him anywhere, so he takes a moment to cool down and calmly asks Naito to release him because he has a score to settle with the guy who killed his dad. However, while his voice may have been calm, Shiki's face still looks really angry, so Naito refuses to untie him. Besides, he knows there's no way Shiki would stand a chance against a Momotaro agent, but if Shiki is so intent on getting himself killed, then Naito has a better way to evaluate him. He takes off his tie, and before Shiki can even react, Naito has snuck up behind him and proceeds to strangle Shiki with it. Basically, Shiki has to find a way out of this to pass Naito's test, and if he can't do it, then he dies either way. Naito doesn't really care. Shiki refuses to let himself die at the hands of some roller skate wearing jerk, so he struggles until blood begins pooling around his eyeballs. But unfortunately, he wasn't able to make it out in time, so he eventually passed out. Naito is totally prepared to keep strangling Shiki until he is officially dead, but with Shiki passed out, his subconscious takes over and he goes into Oni Berserker mode. The blood on the floor forms spikes that nearly clamp down on Naito, so he is forced to back away. And the second he takes his eyes off Shiki, he gets a machine gun pointed at his head. Shiki opens fire without hesitation, but when the dust settles, Naito is completely unharmed because he shielded himself using his blood umbrella. He can tell that Shiki hasn't learned how to control his blood powers yet because the only way he could fight was by going berserk, but this could be a good teaching moment, so Naito plans to subdue him as gently as possible. By the time Shiki regains consciousness, he finds his arm covered in blood while Naito is standing above him. He has no idea what just happened, and Naito had expected as much because when an Oni goes berserk, they lose all sense of self and destroy everything in their path, which is why this room is completely trashed right now. Shiki still doesn't understand a word that Naito is saying, and Naito is starting to think Shiki might just be stupid, but to make it as clear as possible. Naito sees Shiki as a graceless oaf who doesn't understand the first thing about controlling his blood, so he tells him he has been disqualified. Shiki is incredibly frustrated by the way things turned out, but despite all his anger, one thing is clear to him now. Naito is insanely strong, so he stands no chance of beating him. Acknowledging that hurts Shiki's ego, but he needs all the help he can get if he is going to face the Momotaro agency and get revenge for what they did to his dad. He swallows his pride and bows down to beg Naito to make him his student, but Naito is already fed up with Shiki, so he turns him down immediately. In battle, fighting without using your head means instant death, so someone like Shiki, who went berserk without thinking, would never last. He can't control his blood properly, and he's just plain stupid, so Naito doesn't want a useless student like him. Anyway, now that Naito has confirmed that Shiki is useless, he's going to have to dispose of him since he can let an incompetent berserker roam free. Shiki is stunned by what Naito just said, but from what Shiki has learned about Naito so far, he knows he's not joking, so he needs to act quickly if he wants to survive. Shiki turns around and runs away as Naito prepares his blood umbrella, but he knows he won't be able to escape before Naito attacks, which is why he begins charging at him. Naito thinks Shiki must have lost his mind since there's no way he can win a head-on confrontation. He prepares a wall of spikes to intercept Shiki, and in his head, he plans out all the possible moves Shiki could make here. He could either try to attack from the side, jump over, or retreat because he can't get through these spikes, and just as Naito had predicted, Shiki chooses to jump over the spikes. But what Naito hadn't anticipated was the fact that Shiki was able to create a gun mid-jump, so he blasts Naito in the head point blank. Shiki is proud of himself for managing to land a hit on Naito, but Naito wasn't actually injured by the blood bullet since he's still way stronger than Shiki. He is shocked that Shiki was able to control his blood, but he thinks it was just a fluke since from the looks of it, Shiki is on the verge of going berserk again. He doesn't want to have to deal with the gunslinging devil again, so Naito prepares his ultimate attack to finish Shiki off in an instant. However, to his surprise, Shiki actually manages to suppress his berserk mode and remains in control, so maybe it wasn't a fluke after all. Naito doesn't understand how Shiki managed to pull it off, so he asks Shiki for an explanation, and basically Shiki saw Naito using his ring to cut his finger so he could manifest his blood umbrella, and he just tried copying it to produce a similar effect. He pretty much just yelled at his brain to give him a gun, and eventually his arm turned into a gun, so it worked out well for him. Naito finds it hard to believe that such dumb logic was actually worked, but he can't deny that whatever Shiki did was effective. Normally, in order to avoid going berserk, an Oni would need to keep all their emotions under strict control at all times, so hotheads like Shiki usually have a hard time controlling their blood and go on a rampage. However, Shiki is different. It's more like he beat up all his emotions and made his berserk mode work for him. It's a crude method, but the power it allowed Shiki to use was certainly explosive. Shiki tells Nato that all he wants is to get strong enough to kill the man who killed his dad, so Shiki promises he will do his best to learn whatever Nato teaches him if he is willing to make him his underling. Shiki is being very sincere right now, and Nato can see that, but he still rejects Shiki's request. What Shiki did just now was nothing short of a dead man's gambit, and he had no backup plan ready in case he did end up losing control, so Nato still thinks he is incompetent. However, that doesn't mean Shiki is completely hopeless, so Nato has decided to take him in as a student after all, so he's canceling Shiki's execution. He won't explain what Shiki did to change his mind, but what's important is that he thinks Shiki has potential and he doesn't want to see that go to waste. The island they are on is called Onigashima, and at its center is a school built specifically for Oni, the Resetsu Academy. He tells Shiki that the academy is a military school which trains Oni to fight against the Momotaro Agency, but Shiki is more concerned about the fact that he's apparently on an island right now. Nato pokes Shiki in the face for talking about irrelevant stuff while he's still in the middle of his explanation, and then he goes on to state that he's the homeroom teacher at this academy, so from now on he will be in charge of Shiki and the other students. Shiki will have to live, train, and fight every other day so he can eventually handle the Momotaro agents, so he had better be ready. But Shiki's brain was overloaded by all the info Nato just dumped on him. There's still a lot that Shiki doesn't understand, but at the end of the day, he doesn't care what he has to do as long as he gets strong enough to get revenge. A little while later, Nato leads Shiki to a changing room so he can put on his new school uniform, and Shiki feels a bit odd since he didn't think he'd ever have to wear a school uniform again after he got expelled from his old school. Nato tells Shiki that there are a few other students in his class, but among all of them, Shiki is the weakest by far, so he better not pick any fights. By the way, Shiki asks Nato where his dad is, so Nato explains that they kept Shiki's dad's body in the morgue, and the arrangements for the funeral are his decision to make. Shiki's cheerful mood drops when he is reminded that his dad is dead, but Nato tells him there's no use beating yourself up over your regrets. Instead, he should focus on becoming stronger so he never has to experience that kind of regret again. With that said, Nato doesn't want to waste any more time standing around here, so he starts skating away and tells Shiki he only has 15 seconds to make it to class before he's late. Shiki doesn't think that's fair, but he doesn't have a choice, so he runs as fast as he can to catch up to him. They eventually arrive at the class door, and Shiki is trying to figure out what the coolest way to introduce himself to the class would be, but Nato hates wasting time like this, so he just kicks Shiki in and Shiki falls flat on his face, giving himself a nosebleed. Once Shiki realizes his nose is bleeding, he asks the first person he sees to give him a tissue, but Jin tells him to just shut up and be quiet. Jin's response pisses Shiki off, so he gets all up in Jin's face over it. Jin isn't the only other student in this class. There's Kuina, Juji, Homer, and Akari, a day one crash out. But right now, Shiki couldn't care less about the others because he has a score to settle with Jin. Just then, Shiki and Jin suddenly find themselves sitting next to each other with Nato standing behind them, and neither of them could sense Nato move just now, so they are both scared stiff. However, Shiki still complains that he doesn't want to have to sit next to someone like Jin. Unfortunately, Nato couldn't care less about Shiki's personal beef, so he carries on with the class announcement and informs everyone that today they will be playing a game of tag. Shiki is confused and thinks tag might be some sort of code word in this school, but no, it's just a game of tag. Nato says the students will have to make their way through the forest and arrive at the goal in order to win, but Nato will be coming after them, and anyone he catches will be expelled on the spot. To make things a little fairer, he says he won't use his blood at all, while the students are allowed to use as much blood as they want. However, he warns that if they go berserk, then he will be forced to use his blood as well, and it won't end well for them. Jin asks Nato what happens if they accidentally kill him during this game, and Nato answers that if anyone is able to kill him, they will immediately graduate and get assigned to a unit of their choice, so they are welcome to try, but he won't make it easy. Everyone seems excited about the game now that they know about the rewards, but Shiki seems a little hesitant because he still isn't used to all this. However, the little discomfort isn't going to stop him from giving it his best shot, so he tells Nato to bring it on. But before that, there's one more rule Nato forgot to mention. In order to win this game, they are going to need to have one of these balls when they cross the finish line, but handing it to them would be too simple, so Nato throws the ball's way out into the forest. He then splits everyone up into different groups, and the first group comprises Homer, Shiki, and Jin. The second group includes Ikari and Juji, and the third group will have Rokuro and Kuina. The groups with 2 members will have to fight against each other for 1 ball to complete the objective, but as for Shiki's group, the 3 of them are going to have to compete for 2 of the balls, and whoever fails to get ball will be expelled. Shiki tries to object because he doesn't want to be in the same group as Jin, but Nato tells him that if he doesn't want to participate in the game, then he will be expelled immediately, so now Shiki has no choice but to shut up and go along with the game. Just then, Homer walks up to Shiki and tells him he doesn't need to worry about her because she promises she won't get in his way. But while she's saying all this, the only thing going through Shiki's brain right now is, wow, a girl is actually talking to me. This is the first time anything like this has ever happened to him. So he immediately swears that he will protect Homer to the death, but she wasn't asking him to do all that, she just doesn't want to have to fight. She then goes over to Jin to ask him to take it easy on her, but Jin completely ignores her, so she breaks down in tears and tries burying her face in the dirt out of anxiety. Shiki yells at Jin for making Homer cry, but Jin tells him that if he's so interested in making friends here, then he might as well just quit now, because there's no way he's going to make it to graduation without getting expelled. Shiki retorts and says he has his reasons for being here, so he's not going to let himself be expelled until he has achieved his goals. But knowing Shiki, Jin assumes his goal must be something pointless, so he doesn't take him seriously. Hearing Jin make fun of his goals really pisses Shiki off, so when the game finally begins, he completely ignores the primary objective and chases after Jin to pick a fight with him. And Homer just stands there for a few seconds, confused, until she realizes she's supposed to run after them too. In the forest, Jin is jumping from tree to tree, focused on finding the orbs, but all of a sudden, Shiki appears behind him and tries to smack Jin over the head with a stick. He's willing to let a lot of things go, but calling his goal meaningless is something Shiki can't overlook, so he's going to have to teach Jin a lesson. Jin is annoyed by Shiki's constant harassment, but this is a competition after all, so it shouldn't be a problem if he takes the opportunity to beat Shiki to a bloody mess. He then proceeds to take off his gloves and drags his finger across his arms, creating several buzzsaws from the resulting blood. Shiki is shocked that Jin was able to use his blood powers so easily, but he can't let him know that he's impressed, so he tries to do the same thing and bites one of his fingers to draw some blood. Unfortunately, it does absolutely nothing, and yelling in his arm isn't going to make it work, so Shiki decides to just go after Jin with a regular stick. However, that goes about as well as you'd expect when you're going up bootleg Chainsaw Man, so Shiki's stick gets cut in half, and frankly, he's lucky that his head is still attached to his body. Meanwhile, Homer is walking through the forest looking for Jin and Shiki, since she heard a strange sound coming from this place, but then she trips over a branch and falls face first to the ground, giving herself a bloody nose. She then begins spiraling into depression over how useless she is, because she's way too much of a failure to stay enrolled in this school, much less graduate. For a moment, she cheers up because she remembers that Shikiseki helped her out, but that just makes her feel worse about herself because she can't do anything on her own. For now, she decides to continue heading over to the spot she heard the noises from, completely oblivious to the fact that one of the orbs was nearby the entire time. Meanwhile, outside the forest, the others can hear the sounds coming from Jin and Shiki's fight, and Ikari is starting to get really excited, so he wants to go join in. But Juji reminds them that it isn't their turn yet. Things aren't looking good for Shiki right now, because on top of not being able to use his blood weapons like Jin is also way better at fighting than he is, so Shiki is getting his face pounded in. He tries his best to retaliate, but Jin is too fast for him. And before he knows it, he gets knocked to the ground. Jin is getting tired of beating Shiki up, so he tells him to just stay down so he can go complete the challenge without any more interruptions. However, Shiki refuses to give up, so Jin decides to finish him off with a blood slash, but just as the slash is about to connect, Homer happens to walk out from the bushes, putting herself right in a line of fire. Fortunately, Shiki managed to push her out of the way before anything bad could happen, but he got sliced on his arm in the process, so he's bleeding a little now. Once Homer sees this, she starts apologizing over and over again for being the reason that Shiki got hurt. Shiki tries to tell her it's alright, but Homer can't hear him because she's too busy cursing herself for being such a burden. Suddenly, her blood begins to react to her intense self-hatred, and right before Shiki's eyes, a giant blood monster is formed. Jin is just as shocked by what he sees, and he already knew that Oni have more blood in their systems than humans do, but even by Oni standards, that's a ridiculously large blood construct. Homer begs both of them to run, because if they don't, then the monster is going to kill them, and there's nothing she can do about it. While all this is going down, Nato is somewhere else in the forest, waiting for the students to get their act together, when all of a sudden, he is visited by the school principal. The principal says he's surprised that Nato chose to give the new students a life-or-death mission on their very first day when they were supposed to be going through orientation, but Nato thought a practical experience would be more efficient than sitting in a classroom to explain things to them. Several Oni die every year, and some people are killed simply for being related to an Oni, but the really unlucky ones are those who get taken alive and used as test subjects for the Momotaro Agency. Those children committed no crime, and most of them don't even know they're Oni, yet they're slaughtered all the same. It is a true tragedy, and the principal hopes those poor kids get to go to a decent afterlife, but Nato doesn't think about things that way, since he believes that as long as he is strong enough, he won't die at the hands of any Momotaro agent. The principal kind of agrees with Nato's ideology, so he asks him to make his students as strong as possible so they can survive. Back on the battlefield, Shiki managed to escape the monster's attack, and Jin rushed in to destroy it, but the monster's body is too thick for him to cut all the way through with his buzzsaws. Shiki calls out to Homer and asks her to do something about her monster, but unfortunately, she doesn't have any control over it, and she's too weak to do anything right now. Homer passes out shortly after, so Shiki runs over because he wants to get her away from the monster as soon as possible. However, as he approaches, the monster stops attacking and starts instinctively protecting Homer, so it's almost as if her blood has a will of its own. The blood monster clearly sees Shiki and Jin as a threat, so it spits up a ton of blood and floods the area with it. There's no way that was an efficient use of Homer's blood, and even if she has more blood than the average Oni, her supply has got to be running low, so even though she's begging Shiki to run and leave her behind, he refuses. He's already watched someone he cares about die right before his eyes, and it really sucks, so he's not going to let her die here. The monster covers Homer and lets out a scream that everyone in the forest can hear, and it's enough to draw Nato's attention. But he doesn't intend to get involved because he wants to see how the kids will handle it on their own. Shiki attempts to release his blood by dragging his hand against the floor like he did against Nato, but Nato can already tell that it won't work out for him this time. It was a 1 in 100 miracle that Shiki was able to pull it off earlier with no formal training or understanding of how blood release works, but his luck can't last forever. Shiki realizes he is completely powerless to help in this situation, and he feels incredibly frustrated because it was the same when he couldn't save his dad. But while Shiki is having his crisis, Jin tells him to stop crying like a baby and walks up to deal with the monster on his own. He digs both thumbs into his arms, creating a chainsaw in one and a buzzsaw in the other. Nato sees this, and he is really impressed because forming 2 different weapons at the same time requires an extraordinary amount of blood control. And Oni's blood can take any strength or shape required by its user as long as they have a clear image of what they want to create. Often the way blood manifests itself is linked to past traumas or personal preferences and tastes, so it is often said that a blood release offers a glimpse at what kind of person an Oni is. Jin runs up the monster's arm, and once he is close enough to its head, he tries slashing it off with his chainsaw. However, at the last second, it managed to protect itself by sacrificing one of its arms, so Jin has a lot of work ahead of him. And while Jin is busy saving the day, Shiki is stuck on the sidelines, so he feels like an absolute loser. He doesn't understand how Jin is able to use his blood release so easily when Shiki can't get anything to manifest at all. However, just then, he notices something he hadn't thought of before. Every weapon that Jin has created is cutting related, and Homer's blood release must be the monster that is trying to protect her. So maybe the blood release is unique to each individual, and if that's the case, then he knows exactly what his blood release is going to be now. Jin is still doing his best to fight the monster, but he gets caught off guard when it suddenly yells at him and blows out his eardrums, so he is down for the count. Mego assumes this must be Jin's limit, so he is finally ready to step in and save the kids, but before he could do so, Shiki yells from behind Jin. So Jin turns around and he is shocked to see Shiki with a giant blood gun strapped to his arm. The monster tries squashing Shiki as soon as it notices him, but he manages to dodge and braces himself against the ground before firing a blast that completely obliterates the blood monster in one go. The power of that blast was so immense that it actually somehow made it start raining, even though that doesn't really make much sense. But as impressive as it was, it took a lot out of Shiki, so a moment later he falls to the ground. Naino walks over and tells Shiki he used way too much blood in one go, so his control still needs a lot of work. But even for someone who had to use all his blood for one attack, that level of power output was insane. Naino tells Shiki that worst case scenario, using too much blood can kill him, but Shiki already assumed that would be the case, which is exactly why he wanted to save Homer so badly. He asks Naito to take care of her first, because she needs the help more than he does right now, but before Naito can do anything, Jin comes out of nowhere and tries to slice Naito's head off his body, but Naito was quick enough to react, so he forces Jin to retreat. Naito tells him that Homer needs emergency treatment, so this really isn't the time for a fight, but Jin couldn't care less about her condition. He just wants to know if the offer Naito said earlier is still on the table. Naito confirms that if Jin can kill him, he will graduate immediately and be sent to any squad of his choosing, but that's only if he can pull it off. Jin charges at Naito and tries to slash him with his blood saws, but Naito uses his umbrella to parry the strikes and taunts him, saying his half-baked saws will never cut through his umbrella. Jin takes that as a personal challenge, so he runs in to try and cut through the umbrella, but Naito points out that there's a lot more to his umbrella than just deflecting attacks. He flicks a switch, releasing smoke from the umbrella's ferrule, but he assures Jin that it isn't poisonous, so he doesn't need to worry about breathing it in. But it is still hard to see through, so Jin assumes Naito is going to try and sneak attack him now that his vision is obscured. He prepares himself to counterattack as soon as Naito gets close enough, but before he can even react, he gets shot in the arm 3 times. He runs behind a tree for cover, and we see that Naito turned his umbrella into a rifle and is shooting at Jin. The bullets are rubber, so Jin's life isn't in danger, but it still hurts like hell, so Naito is going to keep sniping at him until he goes down. Jin admits that this makes it difficult for him to fight back, but he isn't out of tricks yet, so he creates a few more saws on his arm, and this time he flings them at Naito as projectiles. Naito is impressed that Jin thought ahead to have an attack plan for long-distance fights, but it's still not enough because when Jin tries to sneak up on him mid-air, Naito just casually throws a grenade at him, and he wasn't prepared for that at all. Luckily for him, it was just a smoke grenade so he doesn't blow up, but now he can't see anymore, so he braces himself because he thinks Naito is going to fire more shots at him. But on the contrary, Naito runs up behind him and blows Jin's back out with a punch to the spine. He even had him using those advanced ragdoll physics, but Jin refuses to give up. Naito tells him it was foolish to think he could win even though he was already injured from his fight with Homera's monster, and on top of that, he has already used way too much blood, so he can barely move. He uses his umbrella to pin Jin to the ground and tells him that if this were a real battle, that he would have died multiple times over by now. He asks him if he's really that desperate to see his father again, but hearing that from Naito sends Jin into shock because he doesn't know how he found out about that. Naito explains that he did a little background search on Jin, so he knows a lot of things about him. Like the fact that his father is a Momotaro agent, and that as soon as Jin's dad found out that his wife and children had Oni blood, he slaughtered them all without a second thought, leaving Jin as the only survivor. The scars all over Jin's body are a reminder of what his father did to his family, and the years he had to spend scraping by on whatever trash he could stomach, so he's never going to give up until he finds his father and brings him down with his own two hands, even if it kills him. Naito had no problem with Jin's goal up until now, but that last part about dying really pissed him off. So he slams Jin's head into the ground and tells him there's no point in having a goal if you don't live to see it through. A little while later, Naito calls the school nurse to come out here and take care of Homera since she's still unconscious and can't participate in the trial anymore. As for Jin, Naito tied him to a tree to keep him from causing any more trouble. That leaves Shiki as the final participant, and luckily he has regained enough strength to move again. So Naito tells him he still has to grab a ball and head to the finish line. And it just so happens that Naito has one of the balls with him right now, so Shiki has two choices here. Either he can fight Naito and take the ball in his hand, or he can run away and go looking for the ball that's still in the forest. Shiki looks at Naito for a few seconds, and then he starts running because there's no way he's beating Naito in his current state. Naito gives him a little head start and then starts chasing him down, but Shiki actually circles back and shows up next to Jin. He knows he can't beat Naito on his own, but if the two of them work together, then they might have a shot, so he offers to free Jin as long as he helps him out. Jin initially refuses because he thinks it would be humiliating to accept help from Shiki, but Shiki tells him pride isn't going to help him achieve his goal. Not that it matters much, but Shiki's family was killed by a Momotaro, so he and Jin have that in common, and if it will help him get his revenge, Shiki is willing to work with anyone, even if it's someone like Jin. Naito is still running through the forest, looking for Shiki, and eventually he spots him running in the direction of the finish line, so he cuts him off. Shiki stops in his tracks once he sees Naito, and Naito reminds him that even if he makes it to the finish line, it won't count, unless he has one of the balls with him. But just as he says this, Jin jumps down from one of the trees and tries to tackle Naito. Naito sees it coming, so he is able to dodge, but he is honestly surprised that Jin and Shiki put their differences aside to work together. He thinks their plan might have actually worked if they hadn't already used up all of their blood, but they actually came prepared with a backup plan. Jin has a rock tied to a rope on his arm, and before Naito can react, he has already been tied up with it. Shiki then grabs the other end, and together, he and Jin try and make Naito lose his balance. Naito admits that it's a decent plan, but since they are already tired, there's no way they can overpower him now. However, it turns out that Jin had a little more left in the tank after all, so he launches a blood saw at Naito, forcing him to dodge and lose his solid footing. Now that he is off balance, Shiki runs in and smacks the ball out of his hand as soon as he can. The ball rolls over to Jin, and Naito is impressed that they were actually able to get it from him. But he believes that Jin and Shiki will start fighting over who gets the ball soon enough, so he will just get it back from them before they can get to the finish line. However, to his surprise, Shiki just seems happy that he got the ball away from Naito, so he yells for Jin to take it and start running before Naito can chase after him. Jin is just as shocked as Naito is, but he does take the ball and starts making his way to the finish line, all while Shiki cheers him on. Once Jin is gone, Shiki rubs it in Naito's face that they beat him, but Naito reminds him that if Jin makes it to the finish line like this, then he will be the only one to pass the test and Shiki will end up getting expelled. Shiki has completely forgotten about that rule, and he is devastated, but Jin is already long gone, so there's no way he can get the ball back now. Meanwhile, Jin is running through the forest, and he is confident that he can make it to the finish line in time, but then he remembers how Shiki helped him, and he knows he couldn't have gotten this far without that idiot's help, so he doesn't feel right claiming victory this way. He turns around and yells that he'd rather get expelled than win by using someone else, so he's going to give the ball to Shiki. But just then, a little red mascot thing runs out in front of them. Naito tells them that this is Muku, and he's one of the Oni agency's messengers from Baku Express. He delivers messages efficiently and without a trace, but for him to be here, something really important must be going down. Naito plays the message, and he realizes it's a distress signal from the Kyoto branch. They are currently under attack by the Momotaro agency, and they need immediate backup, so Naito means to head over there immediately. Meanwhile, outside the forest, the others have been waiting for their turn for a long time now, and they are starting to wonder if the others died in there or something. But then they see Nato, Shiki, and Jin running out. Juji notices that Homer isn't with them, so Nato explains that she is in critical condition, so she was sent to the infirmary so she can recover. But that's not important right now because they just got a distress call from Kyoto, so Nato tells them that today's training is officially canceled, and everyone here will be coming with him to the Kyoto branch. Within a few hours, they are all loaded onto a boat, but Juji still isn't clear on the details, so he asks Nato if they are really going to the Kyoto branch that's still actively under attack. Nato tells them they have no choice because all the other classes are currently away on field exercises, so there's no one else available to help. But he tells everyone that they don't need to worry too much, since they'll only be doing support tasks while they are out there. Quina asks why he made them wear these dumb uniforms, so Nato explains that the normal Oni school uniforms stand out too much, and they can't risk drawing too much attention to themselves, so from now on he wants everyone here to act like regular students. Rakuro then asks what Nato meant by support roles, so Nato explains that each municipality has at least one Oni agency unit, and those units have two main responsibilities. The first is to fight on the front lines against the Momotaro agency whenever they show up, and the second is to provide support where necessary. They help the Oni who live among humans and make sure they aren't discovered by the Momotaro agency. And since Oni can't go to regular doctors, the Oni agency also provides free healthcare and emergency medical attention to any Oni that is injured in battle, and that's what they are going to be doing once they get there. Shiki is a little upset that he is being relegated to support duty when this could be his chance to get revenge, but Naito already knows what he's thinking, so he tells him that the agent he is looking for isn't in Kyoto. The Momotaro agency also has regional operations, and the agent that's currently stationed in Kyoto, well, let's just say he's not mentally stable. Once they arrive in Kyoto, Naito leads them all to a little restaurant near Iryuta Temple, and Shiki is confused, so he asks him if he's sure this is the right place since they were supposed to be heading to the secret Oni base. However, moments later, the owner comes out to greet them and she says she has been expecting them. She leads the group to a room and opens a secret hatch that leads underground to the Oni base. Meanwhile, out on the battlefield, Team 3 of the Oni squad has been wiped out by Captain Tsubakiri and his subordinate, Yomoji. Tsubakiri overhears a radio transmission from Oni HQ trying to check in on Team 3, and he thinks it's pathetic how the Oni are trying to play military, but it does make it more fun when he cuts them down. Yomoji tells Tsubakiri that he may have gone a little overboard this time because the cleanup for the mess he made is going to take forever. Tsubakiri apologizes, but he just gets so infuriated when he sees Oni trying to blend in with humans that he can't help himself. He is also a little disappointed that he couldn't get his hands on a female Oni because his last female test subject died last week and he needs a new one. Yomoji hates Oni a lot, but she has seen what Tsubakiri does to them for his experiments, and it haunts her to this day. Tsubakiri tells her it's rude to talk about his work like that, but Yomoji has every right to say it's disgusting, especially since one of his experiments is standing right behind him. And it's so bad that Tsubakiri even nicknamed it Ugly. Tsubakiri says Ugly is a mix between a monkey, a dog, and a bird, and while it does look revolting, it's the ultimate biological weapon since it only eats Oni. Yomoji doesn't really care what Tsubakiri does with his free time, but she reminds him that their job is to protect the civilians from dangerous Oni, not to perform horrific experiments. Suba understands that, but he has always been fascinated by the properties of Oni blood and the way it can be controlled. Yomoji points out that they have similar powers to the Oni, so Suba could easily research that instead. He admits that she's right, but the experiments really hurt, so Suba would much rather use a disposable specimen like an Oni. While Tsubakiri was busy talking about all the gruesome experiments he has been doing, a terrified Oni boy has been hiding behind a pillar. Tsubakiri says he's going to move on to the next area, so the boy breathes a sigh of relief, thinking he is finally safe. However, Tsubakiri shows up right in front of the boy because he knew he was hiding there the entire time. He thinks this is a stroke of good luck since he was running low on Oni children to experiment on, and since he plans to take this one back to base, Yomoji offers to knock it out for him. She begins punching the boy to make him pass out, but while she's doing that, a drop of blood happens to splatter on Suba's shirt, and Suba seems personally offended by this. He may be fascinated by Oni blood, but the mere thought of having it touch him is absolutely revolting. Not to mention the fact that dry cleaning a white suit is hella expensive. He then proceeds to stomp the shit out of that kid. For daring to bleed on his uniform and for extra psychological damage, he asks the boy if he still remembers what his parents look like, because he's going to have to point them out from all the corpses here. The boy is so horrified that he can't speak, so Tsubakiri loses interest and decides to finish him off by ordering the corpses to go squish the boy to death. All Momotaro agents have the ability to fight with a black bacteria in their bodies. Some can make weapons, others can launch spores, but Tsubakiri's ability is particularly disturbing because it allows him to control corpses with his bacteria. At the same time, Naito is leading Shiki and the others through the tunnel system underneath Iryuta, until they eventually arrive at the Oni base located further down. This place is so far underground that no Momotaro agent would ever think to come looking for it. Once they walk in, they find Kyoya in the middle of his break, and he is really happy to see Naito and the others, especially Quina since he almost never gets to meet new girls, so he asks her for her number, but she turns him down immediately. The others ask Naito who this flirty guy is, so Naito explains that he is the head of this support unit, and both of them used to be classmates back in the day. Anyway, now that introductions have been made, Naito tells everyone to stay here while he heads out to the front lines. Just then, Kyoya's assistant comes looking for him, and when she sees the students here, she tells them all to hurry up and get changed because they need all the help they can get right now. She sounds really serious, so the group does as she says, and they are all led through the facility's sick bay. Shiki and the others are shocked to see so many injured people at once, so the assistant explains that this is a result of the current battle against the Momotaro Agency. And the people here are actually the lucky ones who managed to survive. They eventually arrive at the bedside of the patient whom Kyoya's assistant called him to come treat. This man is missing both arms, legs, and his lungs are pretty much cooked, so at best he's got 3 minutes to live as things are now. Kyoya calmly tells the man that he's not going to die today, but Shiki calls him out because he doesn't think it's fair to lie to a dying man like that. However, there's a reason Kyoya is in charge of operations here, and he wasn't lying when he said he could save the man, so he prepares to show the kids what this kind of work really looks like. Meanwhile, out on the battlefield, Tsubakiri and Yomoji have just cornered another group of Oni, and they've already taken out the strongest of the bunch, so there's no way the remaining low-level grunts will be able to handle them. It looks like it's going to be another massacre, but just before Tsubakiri and Yomoji begin their attack, Naito shows up, and he immediately uses his blood to launch a counterattack against Tsubakiri, but unfortunately, he was able to shield himself by using a few of the dead Oni lying around. This isn't the first time Tsubakiri has run into Naito, but he was fairly certain that Kyoto wasn't his territory, so he's surprised to see him here. Anyway, since Naito is here, Tsubakiri asks him if he knows anything about a place where Oni hide in Kyoto, because a bunch of the Oni he's been trying to kill have been escaping. Naito denies knowing anything about that, and Tsubakiri has no proof that there's a hidden facility in the first place, but that won't stop him from searching the city until he finds it. Naito knows it'll cause a lot of trouble if Tsubakiri manages to locate the Oni base, so he needs to deal with him immediately. While that's happening, back at the clinic, Kyoya is done preparing for the procedure. Shiki is confused since he thought the blood transfusions were meant to go to the patient, but Kyoya's assistant tells him to just be quiet and watch. The lungs obviously need to be healed, but there's a limit to how much Kyoya can do in one sitting, so before he begins, he asks the patient whether he wants to have his arms or legs back. The man can barely speak at this point, but he gathers the energy to tell Kyoya that he wants to get his arms back so he can hold his kids again. Kyoya understands, so he assures the man that he'll be able to hold his children again in no time, but fair warning, the procedure is going to hurt like hell, so he's going to need to brace himself for the pain. Now that they are clear on the details, Kyoya slits his wrist and begins pouring blood straight into the man's mouth to heal him. Kyoya's blood is practically useless when it comes to a fight, but if applied to another Oni, it increases their regenerative ability several times over, allowing most to recover from even the most severe injuries. After swallowing some of Kyoya's blood, the man begins experiencing excruciating pain, so Kyoya's assistant asks the boys to hold him still until the procedure is done. And while Shiki-seem is doing that, she asks the others to go get some more blood from the other room. It takes a while, but the man's nub begins to move as new fingers are formed, and before long, the man's arms are completely regenerated, along with his lungs. Shiki is amazed by what he just saw, so he asks Kyoya if he can do the same thing for the man's legs. Kyoya says that as long as the man takes regular doses of his blood, that his legs will grow back eventually, and the reason he didn't just do it all at once is because overusing his blood reduces its effectiveness for the patient. Kyoya tells the man that his life is no longer in danger, but he's likely going to have to retire from the battle unit after this injury, but he is always welcome to come work in the support unit. Kyoya even offers to hook him up with a prosthetic leg in the meantime so he can run around with his kids again, and the man is so touched by his kindness that it brings him to tears. Kyoya tells everyone that this is the reality of what it means to fight on the front lines, and if they aren't careful, they may very well end up in the same condition as this man. He understands that they all have their reasons for wanting to fight in the battle unit, but he wanted them to remember that the people fighting out on the front lines can only keep moving forward because they know they have the support unit backing them up. Seeing all this has motivated Shiki to do his best, so he tells Kyoya that he's willing to do anything to help. However, Kyoya actually has a different job in mind for Shiki. He leads Shiki over to a little girl who is staring blankly into the garden, and he explains that the girl's name is Mei. They rescued her from an attack earlier today, but her parents haven't been found yet, which is why she is catatonic. Kyoya can tell that Shiki is a kind person, so he asks him to look after Mei for a little bit. Shiki thinks he can handle that, so he goes over to Mei and tries to start a light-hearted conversation, but Mei isn't responding to anything he says. He eventually asks her if she wants to go to Aruna with him. And this gets Mei's attention because she has never heard of that place before, so she asks him what it is. Shiki is glad that she finally spoke to him, but he's a little surprised that she's never heard of Aruna since it's common knowledge. Just then, Shiki hears a lot of footsteps nearby, so he and Meg go to check it out, and they see the support unit carrying a bunch of bodies in. Kyoei's assistant explains that the patrol unit came across a large pile of bodies in their usual route, so there are around 30 here, and it just so happens that the corpses of Mei's parents were among the bodies because she breaks down in tears as soon as she sees them. Back on the battlefield, Nato is getting ready to attack, but before he does, Subakiri asks him if the present he left has been received yet. Nato is confused, so he asks what he means, and Subakiri explains that he already knew he'd never be able to find the Oni base on his own, which is why he infected a couple of corpses with his black bacteria and left them out in the open. That way, when the corpses are retrieved, they'd inevitably be brought back to the base of operations, giving Subakiri direct access. In fact, by his calculations, the bodies should have arrived by now, so he decides to give them a quick test run. Over in the base, Mei is still grieving over her dead parents when Subakiri takes control of her father's body. At first, Mei is delighted because she thinks her father managed to survive somehow, but then she takes a look at his eyes, and they are completely black and soulless. It takes a few moments for Shiki and Kyoei to notice the body choking Mei, but when they finally see it, Kyoei immediately recognizes it as Subakiri's ability, so he asks Shiki to cover Mei's eyes while he takes care of it. Shiki doesn't understand what's going on, but he does it anyway, and once Mei's vision is blocked, Kyoei takes 2 scalpels and lobotomizes Mei's dad. The only way to stop a corpse once Subakiri has taken control of it is to destroy the brain. And Kyoei soon comes to the realization that if this corpse was infected, then the rest that were brought in are probably infected as well. Just then, the corpse of Mei's mother begins moving as well, and it manages to catch Shiki by surprise, so he gets put in a chokehold. Kyoei wants to go help him, but he is suddenly tackled by 3 other revived corpses, so Shiki is left to fend for himself. Meanwhile, out in the clinic, dozens of corpses begin moving and start going on a rampage to kill as many Oni as possible, so the situation is really bad. Mei is forced to watch as what's supposed to be her mother is choking Shiki out with a blank stare on her face, and no matter how much she begs and pleads for her mother to stop, she is completely ignored. Kyoei tries to push his way through the corpses so he can get to Shiki, but he's not much of a combat guy, so he ends up getting pushed to the ground and is swarmed by corpses. Shiki is starting to lose consciousness, but he suddenly remembers the gun he was given before they got here. Naito gave him the handgun to use in case of emergencies, since even though Shiki is able to activate his blood now, he still can't control his blood output, so they wouldn't want him to blow up half the city accidentally. It's loaded with special blood-infused bullets, so it should be able to handle most threats. But those bullets aren't easy to make, so he warns Shiki to only use it when absolutely necessary. The gun is definitely necessary in this situation, but Shiki is hesitant to pull the trigger because Mei is clearly still in denial over what has happened, so shooting her mother right in front of her would be devastating. She may even end up hating him because of it, but unfortunately, he doesn't have much of a choice in this situation, so he pulls Mei into his chest to block her line of sight and proceeds to blow her mother's brains out. The thought of what he just did is weighing on him because this is the first time he has ever killed someone before, but he doesn't have time for an existential crisis since Kyoei is still getting attacked. He proceeds to shoot those ones in the head as well to save Kyoei, and he is thankful for the help. But there's no time to waste because the support unit doesn't have any combat protocols in place, and there are still tons of living corpses attacking patients in the clinic, so Kyoei puts Shiki in charge of dealing with the corpses while he's going to focus on getting the patients to safety. Meanwhile, the rest of the clinic has been completely overrun with walking corpses, and no one knows what's going on, but the injured patients are completely defenseless right now, so Ikari and the others are working together to keep them safe. However, no matter how many times Ikari or the others knock one down, the corpses always get back on their feet moments later, so they won't be able to keep this up for much longer. Just then, Shiki shows up, and he tells everyone that the only way to deal with the corpses for good is to destroy their heads, otherwise, they'll never stop moving. He then begins headshotting as many corpses as he can, and when the others realize what he's doing, they finally understand what they need to do. Shin wastes no time and takes off his gloves so he can activate his blood saw to slice into the heads of a few of the corpses, and this time the corpses don't get back up, so targeting their heads really works. The others get to work busting the corpses' heads, and Shiki is still blasting away with his gun. And while they are busy fighting, Juji and Rokuro start carrying patients out to get them to a safe place. A few of the corpses try to follow them out, but Ikari refuses to let that happen, so he punches one and suplexes the other into the ground. Now that they know how to keep the corpses down, they're holding their ground a lot better, but there are still so many that it's going to take a long time to clear them all out. Shiki has been firing at them for a while now, but the more he thinks about it, even though these guys are technically already dead, he is still basically being forced to kill them a second time. All of them must have had someone who cared about them, even though he knows there's nothing he can do to save them now. Having to blow their brains out over and over like this makes him feel like a murderer. Meanwhile, Naito is still outside battling Subakiri, but when he tries to impale him with his umbrella, Subakiri simply blocks it with 3 corpses. Naito is pissed that Subakiri is still using Oni corpses as meat shields, but a second later, Ugly then jumps in and nearly takes Naito's head off with one big swing, forcing him to back off. Subakiri mocks Naito and says there's nothing wrong with him using pests to block attacks from other pests like him, but saying stuff like that is only making him angrier. The other Oni soldiers offer to assist Naito in fighting, but he tells them to just escape to the evac point because they won't last long if they fight Subakiri directly. Unfortunately, Subakiri doesn't intend to let any of them leave here alive, so he asks Yomoji to do her thing before they escape. She steps forward, and as she activates her ability, the black bacteria begins gathering at her feet before forming a square beneath Naito and the other Oni soldiers. Then, before they even get a chance to react, a giant black Q is formed around them. This barrier is specially designed to hold Oni like Naito, and no one can enter or leave without Yomoji's permission, so Subakiri plans to leave them in there while he goes to deal with the Oni base. Panic flashes across Naito's face as he hears Subakiri mention the base, and Subakiri reveals that he already knows exactly where it is because he planted tracking devices on all of the corpses left out, and they all happen to be gathered in the same spot for some reason, under Aryuta Temple, so he's going to pay it a visit right now. He tells Naito and the others to sit tight while he finishes his work, but Sir Maito doesn't get lonely while he's gone. He asks Yomoji to give Ugly permission to enter the barrier. Subakiri doesn't really care if Naito destroys Ugly or not since he can always make a new one, so rather than have it fight, he decides to just make Ugly blow itself up inside the barrier to take Naito and the others out with it. With a snap from Subakiri's fingers, Ugly's body begins to swell with energy, and it doesn't take long for Naito to figure out what's about to happen, so he yells for everyone to get down, but there's nowhere to hide. The explosion goes off, and it's so powerful that it completely destroys Yomoji's barrier, leaving the area covered in smoke and debris. The explosion was huge, but Subakiri is honestly a little disappointed with the output since he was expecting a much larger boom than that, but he can always just have improved on it with the next Chimera he makes. Yomoji asks if they should really be leaving without confirming that all the Oni are dead, but Subakiri doesn't want to get Oni blood on his suit again, and he's pretty confident that no one could have survived an attack like that. However, amidst the rubble, we see Naito heavily injured but still in one piece. Back at the clinic, Shiki and the others are finally done killing all the corpses, and Kyoya's team has relocated all the patients to a different hall. So the worst of it has passed, but both Kyoya and Shiki are worried about how Mei is handling all this since finding out that her parents were dead was already bad enough, but then she had to watch as her parents' corpses were killed a second time. All this must be incredibly hard for her to process, so Kyoya and Shiki go up to her to offer support. Shiki apologizes for shooting her mother in the head, expecting her to hate him for what he did, but to his surprise, Mei tells him it's alright because there was nothing else he could have done. Everyone is shocked that Mei is so calm about this, but she says that deep down she has always known that a day like this would come. Her entire life she has lived in hiding, never attending school, and moving from place to place like they were constantly trying to hide from someone, and that someone finally caught up to them, so an outcome like this was inevitable. She tells Shiki and the others that there's no need for them to worry about her, but Shiki can't stop himself from thinking about how depressing this situation really is, and he can't accept it. When he was Mei's age, all he used to do was sit in front of the TV and watch superhero shows all the time. At the time, he idolized heroes, but even though Momotaro agents are supposed to be the good guys, they are making life a living hell for innocent Oni who have never hurt anyone. The reality of things is so twisted that it makes Shiki sick. But since the Momotaro agency will never see Oni as anything more than villains, then he might as well play the part and become the biggest villain ever seen, so he can crush the Momotaro agency. He hugs Mei and tells her everything's going to be okay because he swears that he will make a world where she can smile again. Hearing those words from Shiki brings a sense of comfort to Mei, so for the first time in a while, the glimmer of hope returns to her eyes. A little while later, Kyoya heads into the tunnels with Jin because they still need to take care of all the bodies of their fallen comrades, so Kyoya wants to get the cremation furnace ready. In the meantime, the others are busy gathering all the bodies so they can be moved. Akari hates the fact that they got stuck doing all the grunt work, and he's even more upset because Yuji has been slacking off for a while now. He yells at him to get back to work, but Yuji says there's something that has been worrying him for a while now. Given the fact that they were attacked from within the base, their location might be exposed, so they might not be safe here anymore. It's better to be safe than sorry, so Yuji decides to use his ability and lets a drop of his blood hit the door. His blood has the ability to let him detect all living beings within a 5-kilometer radius, so while it's not exactly great for combat, it's still really useful. If he focuses, he can even confirm whether someone is a Momotaro agent or not, although it's not precise enough for him to determine the power level of the individual yet. Yuji begins his scan, but after a few moments, he discovers something that's very concerning. Meanwhile, over in Aryuta Temple, Subakiri and Yomoji have just arrived at the old lady's shop, and they wasted no time killing her once they confirmed that she's an Oni. They also found the entrance to the hidden base, so Subakiri calls HQ and asks them to send several of his ugly chimeras to this location, including the special one he has been working on. He also asked them to send him the file on that high-risk Oni that they talked about in the last commander meeting, since there's something he wants to check, since the fact that Nato showed up earlier has Tsubakiri convinced that something big must be going on. Meanwhile, Momoji is checking out the secret entrance, and it looks really big down there, so she's worried about going in when they don't know how many Oni could be waiting for them. She suggests they could just throw some poisonous gas down there, and Tsubakiri kinda likes the sound of that idea, but he suddenly gets a text with a report from HQ, and as soon as he reads it, his face twists with a wicked smile. He tells Yomoji that they are going to head down there in person after all, and when she asks him why, he says he wants to ask each Oni for their name before he kills them. Yomoji asks him why, so he tells her that there should be an Oni down there named Shiki, and if they find him, he wants to capture him alive because there's something special about him and Tsubakiri wants to study it. Hyoya has just finished showing Jin how the crematorium works, so they start heading back to the clinic, but before they go, Jin asks why they built a crematorium here in the first place. Hyoya explains that catastrophes like what happened today are more common than he thinks, so a lot of bodies are bound to pile up and they don't exactly have the freedom to bury Oni in regular cemeteries, so cremation is the only option. He wants to make it clear that the world Jin is about to step into is dangerous, and it's not possible to save everyone, but as long as Kyoe is around, he swears he won't let Jin or the others die so easily. He asks Jin if he has any more questions he'd like to ask, but he says he already understands exactly what he's getting himself into. He walks past Kyoe and Kyoe is about to follow him, but all of a sudden, he senses someone behind him, and by the time he turns around, he has already been stabbed by Tsubakiri. Tsubakiri is disappointed because he was aiming for Kyoe's heart, but his reaction made him miss the vital organs. As soon as Jin realizes that these two are Momotaro agents, he activates his blood saws and tries to go after Tsubakiri, but just then, Yomoji appears behind him, and she begins forming a Q around his head. Fortunately, Kyoe notices in time and manages to pull Jin out of the way, causing the Q to be formed around his arm instead, and it's a good thing too, because that Q twisted Jin's arm all the way around, so it's definitely broken. Oni have incredible healing factors, so Jin says his arm should be back to normal in a few minutes, but the healing process is extremely painful, so he's having a hard time thinking straight. With both Kyoe and Jin injured, it is pretty clear to see that their odds of winning are almost zero, so Kyoe tells Jin to go back to the clinic to warn Shiki and the others that Tsubakiri is in the building. Then he wants everyone to get the patients as far away from here as possible, but Jin asks how Kyoe plans to survive until then. In all honesty, Kyoe is not sure how this will play out, but he says he will figure something out, and Jin decides to trust his judgment, so he runs off and tells Kyoe that he will make sure to come back for him. Now that that's done, Tsubakiri tells Yomoji to do her thing, so she bends down and starts spreading her bacteria. Kyoe has no idea what they are planning, but from what he saw earlier, Yomoji's power allows her to create black boxes. So when he sees a black wall appear at the end of the tunnel, he realizes that they are trying to trap the Oni in here with them. Once Yomoji is done, she tells Kyoe that she just sealed off the entire underground tunnel network, so there are absolutely no escape routes now. With the barrier in place, there's not much hope of Neo coming to save them, so their only hope is to rely on the combat power of Shiki and Jin, but frankly, Kyoe isn't sure those two can handle Tsubakiri and Yomoji. Kyoe knows he said he'd find a way to hold them off, but no matter how he looks at it, he's pretty sure he's going to die today. Just then, Tsubakiri says he has a question he wants answered, so he asks Kyoe if he happens to know an Oni by the name of Shiki. Kyoe doesn't respond, but if Tsubakiri is looking for Shiki, it can't be good, so Kyoe needs to keep him busy for as long as possible to buy Shiki some time. He reaches into his jacket and pulls out a syringe of deadly poison, which he carries on himself for emergencies like this. However, before he even gets a chance to use it, Tsubakiri has already dashed past him and sliced his carotid artery. Kyoe begins panicking and tries to use his blood to heal himself quickly, but it's already too late as blood spurts out everywhere and he falls to the ground. Tsubakiri is disappointed that Kyoe really died so easily, but in the rush to get over here, he forgot to bring some corpses along with him. So he's about to use his powers to take over Kyoe's body, but at the last second, he stops because it looks like Uglies are finally here. He asks Yomoji to let them in, so she snaps her fingers and 4 of Tsubakiri's monsters pass through the barrier. Tsubakiri asks them if they brought what he asked for, so one of the Uglies spits up a large box, but he doesn't want to touch something covered in Ugly spit, so he tells them to unwrap it for him. The Uglies do as they are told, and once they are done unwrapping, it is revealed that the box is a special coffin. Meanwhile, Jin makes his way back to the clinic to warn everyone. However, when he opens the door, he finds the main room completely empty. He starts walking around and yelling for the others because he's worried something bad might have happened to them already, but as he turns a corner, he sees Shiki pointing his gun at him. Shiki and the others are relieved that it was just Jin, and Jin is glad that they are all still alive, but he wonders where the patients all went. Shiki explains that Juji's ability allows him to scan a 5-kilometer radius, and he happened to locate 2 Momotaro agents in the tunnels, so he warned everyone, and they immediately began evacuating. Unfortunately, Partway through the evacuation, a strange wall appeared and blocked off all the exits. By then, all the patients had been moved to safety by then, but a bunch of the staff are still stuck here, including May. Quina asks what they are going to do now, and Carrie suggests they should start looking for any possible exits, but Kyoya's assistant tells him that she already checked the entire network, and all the exits are blocked off. Just then, Shiki realizes that Kyoya isn't here, so he asks Jin what happened to him, but before he can say anything, an ugly enters the room. Everyone is so stunned that they don't know what to do, and in their state of confusion, the ugly walks up to one man and proceeds to eat him right in front of everyone. Seeing such a horrific sight sends all the support team members into a panic, so they all run away, and Akari tells the others that they should do the same since it would be bad if they get cornered here. A few minutes later, Sobakiri and Yomoji arrive at the clinic, and he's impressed that the Oni were able to build something this elaborate underground. He instructs the Uglies to put the coffin down here and then tells them that they need to bring the boy named Shiki back alive, but they can kill everyone. Yomoji asks what Subakiri is going to do in the meantime, so he tells her he's just going to wait here until they are done because he has some thinking to do. Meanwhile, Kuina and Rokuro are hiding in the changing room, and she's looking through the drawers to find a change of clothes since this nurse outfit would be difficult to fight in. While she's doing that, Rokuro lies on the ground in panic, and he's certain that his body is going to give out from all the stress he's suffering. Kuina tells him to quit whining because he's just out of breath from running over here. She eventually decides to change into some sportswear she found since it's the easiest to move in and she needs to get ready to set up an ambush. Rokuro is amazed by how positive, healthy people like Kuina can be because he could never think like that. In fact, just the thought of having to fight that thing is giving him a headache. The two of them suddenly hear the sound of an ugly approaching and Rokuro goes into a full-blown panic attack because he doesn't want to fight that thing. He begs Kuina to do something to handle it for him, and seeing Rokuro act so helpless triggers her yandere instinct, so she tells Rokuro he doesn't have to worry because she'll take care of it. Rokuro is surprised that she actually agreed to fight without him, but Kuina tells him he should hurry up and hide before it's too late, so he scampers off into a closet for safety. Moments later, an ugly bursts through the door and Kuina seems confident that she can handle it, but then it points to her and asks if she's named Shiki. Kuina is caught off guard by the fact that this thing just spoke to her, but she tells it that she's not Shiki, and once the ugly confirms that she's not the one he's looking for, it charges at her. Kuina dodges all of the ugly's attacks and rolls out of the way, but in the process, the ugly destroys a wall, and the force knocks the closet that Rokuro is hiding in over, causing him to get so scared that he ends up passing out. Meanwhile, outside, Kuina is annoyed because the ugly knocked Rokuro over, so she's done messing around. She bites into her finger and activates her blood eclipse, forming gloves around her fist, and with these, there's no way she can lose. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the facility, Jin is running back out into the tunnels to find Kyoya, and Yomoji is wandering through the clinic halls looking for someone to attack. As for Ikari, he gets cornered by an ugly in one of the rooms, but this is exactly what he was hoping for since it gives him a chance to actually do something. The ugly raises its voice and asks him if his name is Shiki, but Ikari angrily denies it because he doesn't want to be compared to Shiki. But speaking of Shiki, he has been running around looking for a safe place for Mei to hide, but there aren't many options, so he ends up hiding her in some bushes and hoping for the best. Back with Kuina and Rokuro, Rokuro finally regains consciousness, and he is panicked because his heart definitely stopped from the stress a moment ago, so it's a miracle that he's still alive. He then notices that he's not hearing any noise from outside, so he comes to the conclusion that everything he experienced up till now must have been a crazy dream because there's no way monsters would really be coming after him. However, when he opens the door, he finds the ugly staring right at him. That sends him into another panic attack, so he tries calling a timeout because he doesn't want to get eaten. But for some reason, the ugly actually doesn't attack him. Rokuro looks up and sees Kuina telling the ugly to come over to her, and it is obediently following her instructions. She tells it to stand right there and turn its head towards her, and once it is in position, Kuina proceeds to knock the daylights out of the ugly. Rokuro knows she's doing this to protect him, but right now, he's even more scared of Kuina than he was of the ugly, so he can't bear to watch. Kuina continues beating the ugly until it eventually stops moving, at which point she gets up and admires her handiwork. Her ability is called I Love, and whenever an opponent comes into contact with enough of Kuina's blood, they fall under her spell and gradually lose the will to fight, allowing her to beat them down as much as she wants. Those who know Kuina describe her as a dependable sisterly type, and she definitely is dependable, but her close friends describe her a little differently. She has a tendency to become obsessed with people she cares about, so she ends up wanting to do everything for them, and I mean everything. On the bright side, she's not at tie you up in the basement levels of obsession yet, so that's a good thing. She's just found her new object of affection, so she'd do anything for him at this point. Rokuro thanks Kuina for saving him from that monster, and he swears that he will never forget what she did for him, but that's just making her more infatuated. She tells Rokuro that he doesn't need to worry about it, since she can handle weaklings like that without breaking a sweat, and while she says all this, she is laying out a footing on the floor. Rokuro wonders what that's supposed to be for, but before he can ask, Quina picks him up and tucks him into bed with her laying next to him, and he has no idea how he's supposed to react in this situation. Meanwhile, one of the support team's members has been spotted and is currently running away from one of the uglies, even though she's a good distance ahead of it. Before she can escape, it pierces her skull, killing her instantly. The ugly then walks past the woman's corpse to continue searching the clinic for more people to kill, and back in the room with Quina and Rokuro. He's still not sure what to do here. He stares straight ahead and tells Quina that she's awfully close to him, but she's more concerned about how pale his face looks right now, so she gets up and offers to make something for him. She asks Rokuro what his favorite food is and starts looking around to see if she can find a kitchen. And while she's doing that, Rokuro puts some serious thought into what just happened. It makes no sense for Quina to care about him this much, so the only logical explanation he can think of is that this is a trap, and she's trying to get him to lower his guard so she can use him as bait to distract the monsters. Quina notices Rokuro trembling in fear, and she gets really worried, so she asks him what's wrong, but a moment later, she hears something approaching. She turns around and finds another ugly standing there, so she gets up and prepares to beat this one up as well. The ugly swings its tentacles at Quina, so she moves out of the way, but that thing pierced straight through the wall, so getting hit with one of those strikes would be really bad. She realizes this one is going to be tougher to beat, but she still thinks she can overwhelm it, so she jumps in with a haymaker. However, it turns out that the ugly is able to make tentacles out of every part of its body, including its head, so it twists its head out of the way and stabs Quina in the shoulder. She tries to keep her distance so she can recover, but the ugly wraps itself around her arms and proceeds to bounce her around the room like a pinball. The entire time, Rokuro was just cowering in the corner of the room, watching Quina get manhandled by this thing. She can't break free from its grip, and she's way too disoriented from all the spinning and slamming to fight back, so the ugly starts stomping her head into the ground. And it's not going to stop until her brains are scattered all over the floor. Rokuro realizes the situation is really bad because if nothing is done soon, then Quina is definitely going to die. He wants to go help her, but he's too scared to leave his hiding spot because he's sure he'll be murdered the second he steps out. Quina is still getting the stuffing stomped out of her, and Rokuro tries to convince himself that if he ignores it, someone will eventually come to save her, but deep down he knows that's not true. He's Quina's only hope of survival right now, yet he can't bring himself to move, and he is left wondering when he became this much of a wimp. He wasn't always like this, and now that he thinks back, it all started with his first crush, Lulu. Whenever she was with him, Rokuro would never miss an opportunity to oar a farm in front of her, even going as far as to jump off a cliff for no reason aside from the fact that it made him look cool. Doing it was so terrifying that his hands were shaking, but he kept himself calm and collected because he didn't want to look weak in front of Lulu. Rokuro was born in a secluded town in the woods where lots of Oni lived among people, so things were relatively peaceful. Rokuro would often spend the day dancing with Lulu, and it's one of his fondest memories with her, but one day she suddenly fell ill. From the moment an Oni's horns appear, their blood chemistry changes entirely, so she couldn't go to a regular doctor anymore. Fortunately, there was an Oni doctor in town, so Rokuro was able to take Lulu to get treatment, and she was set to make a full recovery. However, things rarely ever work out so conveniently, and a few days later, the village was raided by Momotaro agents. Lulu and Rokuro were lucky enough to survive the raid without being found, but the Oni doctor wasn't so lucky, and with him gone, there was no one left to treat Lulu's illness, so her condition kept deteriorating day by day. Rokuro did everything he could to help her, but he didn't exactly have the necessary medical knowledge, so he decided to go from town to town, searching for another Oni doctor, no matter how long it takes. Unfortunately, he was already out of time. Lulu grabbed his hand to say goodbye, and the final words she ever said to him were that she had always thought he was cool, so she wants him to stay that way once she's gone. Moments later, Lulu's arms went limp and she drew her last breath. Rokuro spent days crying over her body, and he had spent so long relying on her as his safe haven that he didn't know what to do once she was gone. Eventually, the only thing he had left of her was her scarf. And once she was gone, all the worries and dread he had been keeping buried for her sake ate him alive. His hair turned white from all the stress, he suffered severe insomnia, and before he knew it, he had become a completely different person. Back to the present, Rokuro watches as the ugly prepares to finish Quina off, but he is still too scared to do anything, so he accepts that she's going to die because he's too useless to help. But just then, he recalls Lulu's final words asking him to remain cool and confident for her sake, and if she were to see him now, she'd definitely be disappointed. Just as the ugly was about to split Quina's head open, Rokuro dashes out of the closet and carries her out of the way. He sets her down gently, and he feels bad since Quina only got hurt because she was trying to protect him. If Lulu could see him right now, he's sure she'd be disappointed in the kind of man he became. He can't keep living like this, so he swears to himself that he will become someone Lulu would be proud of, and to do that, he first has to face the monster right in front of him. He'd be lying if he said he wasn't terrified right now. In fact, his heart is beating so fast that it feels like it could burst out of his chest at any moment, but he smiles through it and tells himself everything will be fine because he can handle this. He bites into his finger to allow his blood to flow and forms a visage of Lulu. He asks her if she'd be willing to stand by his side again, even if he's not as cool as he once was. The blood visage floats behind Rokuro and Lulu gives him a hug. So as his blood covers his body, Rokuro can literally feel the panic and anxiety fading from his body, giving him much more confidence than he usually has. This is his blood eclipse release, and yes, it is basically a dose of antidepressants, but it also comes with this cool jacket and sick fawn. The Ugly tries to pierce him with its tentacles, but with his blood awakened, Rokuro is able to dash past the Ugly's attack and slices both of its arms to pieces in one move. This technique is called the Frigid Ash Dance, and Rokuro modeled it after one of the dances he used to do with Lulu. It creates a swarm of razor-sharp petals that slice and sync with Rokuro's dance moves, and that was just the start because he still has a lot of moves left to try. The Ugly launches another attack with the rest of its body, but it's nowhere near fast enough to touch Rokuro. He feels lighter than ever before because right now it's almost as if he's dancing with Lulu by his side, so he feels like he could accomplish anything. And now that he's back to his old self, he proceeds to aura farm for a few seconds before slicing the hell out of the Ugly and reducing it to chunks. Rokuro is really proud of himself because he finally accomplished something and he looked really cool doing it, but it's too bad no one was around to see. Meanwhile, Shiki is still hiding in one of the rooms with Mei, and once the coast is clear, he tells her it's safe to get out now, but Mei seems a little off. Shiki asks her what's wrong, so she tells him that since her mom and dad are already dead, that maybe she's better off dying as well. Shiki can understand why she'd feel that way, and it certainly is an option, but he tells her that she can't let herself die, no matter what. Shiki knows Mei's parents most likely wanted to protect her more than anything else in the world, so if she dies, then it'd mean all their efforts were wasted. However, as long as Mei continues to survive, it means they haven't lost yet, so Shiki tells her to live on and fight. Shiki also promises to fight and crush the people who stole Mei's family from her, and he hopes that Mei will be cheering for him when he does. For now, he asks her to stay here and keep hiding since even though the monsters are gone, there are still Momotaro agents on the loose, and he doesn't want them getting their hands on her. Mei can't believe Shiki is really going out to face the Momotaro agents, and she tries to stop him because those guys are a whole lot stronger than he is, and she doesn't want him to die, but Shiki tells her she doesn't have to worry because he will win. He doesn't know how they'll do it, but his heart is telling him that there's no way he can lose and that's good enough for him, so he'll keep fighting no matter how hard it is. Meanwhile, outside the barrier, Nato finally regains consciousness. He asks the guys how long he has been unconscious, and they tell him it's only been around 15 minutes, but a quarter hour is more than enough time for Tsubakiri to have done some serious damage. The guys apologize to Nato because the only reason he got hurt was because he had to protect them, but he says there's no need to worry about that. Right now, he has bigger issues to deal with, so he gets up and starts skating away, but the men tell him to stop. They tell him that he's too injured to be moving right now. And they ask where he could possibly be going at a time like this. Mango explains that he's going to the base at the Iryuta temple because his students are there, and they are going to need his help dealing with Tsubakiri. Back at the clinic, Shiku walks into the main hall and finds Tsubakiri patiently waiting there. He recognizes the Momotaro uniform, and he recalls Kyoya mentioning that one of the Momotaro agents named Tsubakiri was responsible for hijacking all those dead bodies and using them to attack the clinic earlier. Shiki demands to know if he is Tsubakiri, but before he answers that, Tsubakiri asks what his name is. Shiki doesn't understand why he's so interested in names, but he does reveal that his name is Shiki Ichinose, and as soon as Tsubakiri realizes that the Oni in front of him is the one he has been looking for, he gets a wide grin across his face. Shiki demands to know why Tsubakiri attacked them like that earlier, because only a sicko would desecrate and disrespect the corpses of the dead like that. However, Tsubakiri laughs in Shiki's face because he finds this whole thing hilarious. He won't deny that he's a sicko, but it's amusing to hear Shiki talk about how it's wrong to desecrate the corpses of the dead as if he's human. He reminds Shiki that only humans have rights, so everything he has done to the Oni is fair game, and he doesn't plan on stopping anytime soon. Hearing Tsubakiri say that sends Shiki into a blind rage, so he pulls out his gun and aims it at him. At the same time in the tunnel system, Jin is on his way to go check on Kyoya when he is suddenly stopped by Yomoji. She asks him if he's on his way to see Kyoya, because if so, he shouldn't waste his time since he's been dead for a while. Yomoji saw the expression on Jin's face change when she mentioned that Kyoya is dead, and she thinks it's laughable that monsters like them would care about one another. Jin composes himself and tells Yomoji that the only thing he cares about is his goal, and that goal involves him killing every single Momotaro agent out there, so he's going to start with her. Jin activates his blood saw and charges at Yomoji, but even though he's sure his attack landed, it didn't feel right for some reason. He looks back and sees that Yomoji managed to encase herself in one of her barriers, so his saw had no effect on her, and it's going to be a lot harder to take her down than he thought it would be. Meanwhile, Tsubakiri is barely taking Shiki seriously and casually knocks the gun out of his hand with a pocket knife. He tells Shiki to try a little harder since there's no way he really thought a little toy like that to be enough to beat him. Shiki refuses to let that slide, so he then proceeds to create a fully modded arm cannon with a scope attached. Naito told Shiki to avoid using his powers since he doesn't have control over the output yet, but this isn't the time to be worrying about that. So without hesitation, he pulls the trigger on Tsubakiri, blasting him along with everything in a 5-meter radius to Kingdom Come. Tsubakiri managed to dodge the blast somehow, and he is completely unharmed, but he admits that he wasn't expecting Shiki to have so much firepower, so that kind of startled him. Shiki mocks him and asks if Tsubakiri is really scared of a little old gun like this because there's a lot more where that came from and he doesn't plan on holding back, so Tsubakiri better be prepared. He's even more interested in Shiki now that he has seen what he can do, so he says he's going to get serious and open up the coffin he brought to release his secret weapon. A Momotaro corpse. Shiki calls Tsubakiri a sicko for using the corpse of his own ally, but Tsubakiri just calls him an idiot in response. There's nothing wrong with believing that the dead should be left to rest peacefully, but deciding that everyone needs to follow that belief is just plain stupid. Besides, this guy willingly volunteered himself to become Tsubakiri's puppet, so there's no ethical debate to be had. Tsubakiri is tired of talking, so he activates the puppet's ability, and all of a sudden, Shiki falls to his knees because the air around him feels oddly heavy. Tsubakiri explains that when he uses his ability on a Momotaro, he also gains access to the abilities that they had when they were alive. And this guy had the ability to mix his bacteria with the oxygen in the air and manipulate its weight, creating a high-gravity field around any target, and right now, Shiki is feeling the full force of that ability. Meanwhile, Naito and the other Oni have arrived at the tunnel, and they've been trying to get in for a while now, but none of their weapons are even making a dent. The men suggest they should try looking for another way in, but Naito stops them because if Yomoview was the one who made this barrier, it has probably already blocked off all possible entrances. The men ask Naito if he can just blast through it with his powers, and that certainly is a possibility since a large amount of force should be able to destroy Yomoji's barriers, but Aryuta Temple is right above this place, and it's packed full of tourists, so they need to get them out of there first. The men tell Naito that there's no way they'll be able to evacuate all those tourists in time, especially since they have no authority over the humans, but Naito refuses to let innocent people get hurt. Just then, Juji shows up because he sensed Naito's presence, and he wanted to give him an update on everything that happened before he got here. They managed to get all the injured Oni out of there before the barrier was set up, but a bunch of the support staff members, including Shiki, are still trapped in there. The extra info gives Naito a better picture of the situation inside the barrier, but while he's trying to come up with a plan, one of the men walks up to inform Naito that he found this girl nervously pacing around the entrance, saying she wants to help. Naito is surprised to see Homer here, and so is Juji, but for some reason, seeing her in that school uniform makes his IQ drop 100 points as he starts awkwardly trying to hit on Homer out of nowhere, and he's not good at it either. Naito honestly thought Juji was one of the sensible students in his class, so you can't imagine how disappointed he is to find out that Juji is a chronic gooner. He's going to just ignore him for now, and as for Homer, he appreciates the fact that she wants to assist him, but right now, there's not much she can do to help. But on second thought, maybe there it is. Naito asks Homer to come out into the forest with him, and he sends Juji into the temple to provide status updates. Juji asks what this is all about, so Naito explains that they are about to set off an earthquake. Nothing major, but enough to cause a landslide and scare the tourists into evacuating on their own. Once that happens, Naito wants Juji to do a perimeter sweep to make sure all the people are gone, and then it'll be safe to break through Yomoji's barrier. That all sounds good, but Juji asks how they are going to cause the earthquake in the first place, and to that, Naito says he's going to use Homer's Blood Titan. Homer freaks out and tells him she has no control over what the Titan does, but Naito tells her it's fine since he will make sure to stop it from doing any serious damage. Even so, Homer is still too scared to activate her powers, so rather than waste time giving her a pep talk, Naito calls Juji and tells him the plan is cancelled. The longer they wait, the more danger those inside will be in, so they'll just need to come up with another plan to evacuate the temple. Naito then turns to Homer and coldly tells her she's expelled because he has no use for an Oni who can't use her powers. He starts heading back to meet up with Juji and the others, but Homer suddenly speaks up and begs him to wait. She explains that she's just scared of unleashing her powers when she can't control the damage that they'll cause, and Naito tells her that there's nothing wrong with being scared, but letting that fear paralyze you is a problem. Naito says he knows about the incident that Homer caused, and panic flashes across her face as she hears this, but he goes on to state that everyone at the academy has some kind of burden they are carrying, but they are all choosing to move forward to achieve their goals regardless. Naito asks Homer why she chose to join the academy in the first place, and she says she joined because she wanted to learn to control her blood, but to do that, she realizes she needs to come to terms with the potential danger involved. She bites her finger to activate her powers, and as soon as the giant blood titan is formed, immediately attacks Naito. Just as Homer feared, she still has no control over it, so she starts apologizing over and over, but Naito assures her that this is fine since he is strong enough to handle it. Meanwhile, down in the temple, the tourists feel the ground shake beneath their feet, and they all start panicking because a landslide could be heading their way. All the Oni present direct the people out of the temple safely, and once the entire place is clear, Hyuji gives Naito the signal to let him know the evacuation is complete. Naito then jumps behind Homare to knock her out with a chop to the neck and puts a stop to the Blood Titan's rampage. He thinks she did a good job today, but it's going to take a lot for her to overcome her fear. Meanwhile, inside the tunnels, Jin is still busy fighting Yomoji, but he hasn't made much progress because he's still not sure what the full extent of her power is. He decides to keep his distance so he doesn't get caught off guard, but while he is backing away, Yomoji manages to create a box behind him, and before he can react, he is trapped within its walls. Yomoji laughs at Jin because this pretty much means she wins. He can't leave that box without her permission, and she doesn't plan to stop at simply trapping him. She begins shrieking the box around Jin, and she plans to keep going until he is squished into a meat cube. Jin yells that he can just break himself out, but Yomoji doesn't think he'll be able to manage it. She knows using blood requires a lot of concentration, and it's really hard for people to concentrate when they are crammed in a tight space. With how tiny the box has already gotten, she figures there's no way Jin will be able to think clearly in there. However, it actually doesn't bother him at all. Yomoji was expecting Jin to have started screaming in terror by now, but instead, she heard the distinct sound of blades cutting something, and a moment later, Jin breaks his way out of the box. She can't believe Jin was able to stay calm in a situation like that. But this isn't his first time being forced into tight spaces. In fact, as a kid, he got used to sleeping in air ducts that were way smaller than that, so this was barely a challenge for him. Just then, the head of an ugly is thrown between Jin and Yomoji, so they both turn to see who threw it and see Ikari itching for a fight. Jin tells him to back off because he's already got dibs on beating Yomoji down, but Ikari is already pissed, and he needs someone to take his anger out on. Ikari then stops to take a proper look at Yomoji, and he is just now realizing that her outfit is borderline flashing him. He yells at her and asks why she didn't wear something more appropriate for the battle, but this suit gives her +5 defense, so there's no way she's changing it. Akari's anger is starting to flare up even more from Yomoji, assaulting his eyes with her thick thighs, so he prepares to attack and activates his ability. Even though she's outnumbered, Yomoji still thinks it'll be easy to deal with the two of them, so she sends dozens of barriers their way. However, Ikari smiles and says she's never going to catch him with a slow technique like that. He then proceeds to effortlessly leap between the barriers, and before Yomoji could even register what he just did, Ikari appears in front of her and kicks her square in the chin. Yomoji is sent flying back several meters, and she now realizes that she underestimated him a little too much. Ikari's blood release is called devilish hysteria, and basically, rather than go to therapy for his anger issues, he converts all that rage into power for his ability. However, he can only use it 3 times a day, and the effect generated is pretty much random, so one day it could be a speed boost, and another day it could be a strength boost. Personally, he's not a fan of the speed boost, but he'll have to make it work for now. Speed-type abilities are actually Yomoji's worst matchup, because it takes time for barriers to form, but that doesn't mean she's giving up. Meanwhile, outside the barrier with the area cleared, Naito is ready to deal with the barrier, so he activates his ability and blows a hole through it. He limited his output to avoid damaging the temple up top, but the tunnels are definitely going to collapse soon, so the base here is done for. That said, their top priority right now is rescuing the survivors and getting them out of here before the tunnels cave in, so everyone heads in together. Before long, the group reaches the fight between Ikari and Yomoji is really starting to get worried because Ikari was bad enough, but now she has to deal with Naito too. Naito tells her he already understands her ability, and it probably required a ton of energy to seal this place off, so she won't be able to fight for much longer. Naito tells her to surrender immediately if she knows what's good for her, but Yomoji's not going down without a fight. She takes off her jacket and swears that she'll kill every last Oni here, even if it's the last thing she does. Meanwhile, Shiki is still being crushed under 1,000 pounds of extra weight, and Subakiri is getting ready to tie him up and take him back to Momotaro headquarters. However, Shiki soon realizes that the gravity field has a limited range, so he is able to roll out of its range. Subakiri is a little disappointed because now he has to start subduing Shiki all over again, but Shiki yells that he won't fall for the same trick a second time. He creates another blood gun and fires a blast at Subakiri, but the gravity field is able to redirect the shot to the ground, so Shiki's gun isn't going to be effective anymore. On top of that, with everything that has happened so far, Shiki can barely move, so it's going to be really hard for him to defend himself. Subakiri takes this as the perfect opportunity to test out one of his friend's other abilities, because by compressing the oxygen into a sphere, he can increase the weight by over 100 times, creating this super dense ball. He then throws the ball at Shiki, hitting him with several tons of force in one go, but that's not even the worst part. Since the ball is still being compressed, it is pulling Shiki in with hundreds of G's of force, so it's only a matter of time before he is completely crushed. A moment later, all of Shiki's ribs collectively clock out and blood begins to pour out of his eyes and mouth as he falls to the ground in agony. Subakiri looks at Shiki with amusement, and he can hardly believe that someone as pathetic as him is really related to Kishin. Shiki has no idea what he's talking about, and Subakiri is surprised that he hasn't been informed of this by now, but apparently, Shiki is the child of Kishin. the strongest Oni general in history, and that makes him a specimen worth studying. This was the end of episode 9. Subscribe to not miss the next part.